And as I told Cece, if I disappear, it's because we have thunder and lightning and torrential rain all around me, even though my picture looks like a sunny day. Thank you all for being here. My name is Deb Hodgson, and I'm co-founder of New Hampshire for Safe Technology, along with Jen White and Lori Schreier. And my unplanned journey over the past 5 years is what has led me here today. A little about my journey into wireless. In the fall of 2017, we had scheduled to have our home measured for RF on our return from a hiking trip out west. I had planned to come off blood thinners, and I was aware that wireless can thicken the blood, so I thought that was a prudent precaution to take. I'd also been having issues with insomnia, constant ringing in the ears, heart arrhythmia, palpitations, tooth and jaw pain, dry eye, facial flushing, dizziness, and blood pressure issues. I had developed severe pressure headaches that felt like my brain was swollen or on fire. I had great difficulty thinking, speaking, and remembering. I even got lost several times in the town I have lived in for nearly 40 years. I did not yet know that it was all related until we removed the wireless from our home and cars. My health quickly improved. My seemingly unrelated symptoms disappeared as well. Interestingly, the plant in my kitchen that sat there doing nothing for over a year suddenly grew 15 inches in just 2 months. That was an eye-opener to everyone in the family. It's so much easier to believe what you can actually see. Realizing this is an issue that ultimately affects everyone, I stepped out of my comfort zone, way out, with a little push from reading EMF Off by Olga Sheehan and the support of Cece, despite knowing others will certainly think I must be crazy. I held 2 public screenings of Generation Zapped and reached out to many, including legislators. My state rep, Patrick Abrami, was truly exceptional. He actually listened and responded. He investigated the science and was successful getting New Hampshire to pass the first US law to begin addressing technology safety. The New Hampshire Commission on Health and Environmental Effects of Wireless Technology was established in the fall of 2019 and produced a groundbreaking report in the fall of 2020. The New Hampshire Commission report is a great place to become informed, to empower you to protect yourself, your family, and community by becoming aware and learning how to use technology safely. We at New Hampshire for Safe Technology, along with Cece Doucette of Mass for Safe Technology, are supporting the Commission's work through community information sessions like this, and we thank you for being here. Our speaker today is Cece Doucette. She's been a tireless supporter to us in New Hampshire, and we're grateful to her. Welcome, Cece.
Thank you so much, Deb. It's lovely to be here with you once again. And I see that we have Dr. George Carlo with us this evening, and sometimes he comes and sometimes he goes. But I wanted to give him a shout out. When Deb mentioned the film Generation Zapped, Dr. Carlo's work is featured in here for the early on work that he did with industry and our government to investigate whether wireless technology could be harmful. Dr. Carlo, would you like to unmute and just say a quick hello?
Hello, and thank you for the kind words. Much appreciated.
You betcha.
Looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and I'll stick around as long as I can.
Okay. Any words of encouragement that you would like to give to people who are perhaps just joining the technology safety conversation?
Well, I think there's some progress being made at the federal level, under the radar, of course, and I think we're making progress. And part of what I think part of where the progress is, it's in convincing sectors of the industry that they need to compete on safety. And believe it or not, there are many takers. They understand what they're dealing with. You know, if I may share an anecdote, you know,
Sure.
from way back in the days, you know, when we finished the work in the WTR, and my book came out, the Cell Phones, Invisible Hazards in the Wireless Age, the industry pretty much flashed my picture and name up all across the industry, saying this is Darth Vader. And and I used to use a cell phone, you know, with a headset. and my headset broke, had a short in it. So I had to go into an AT&T store in DC to get a new headset. And so I walked in, and there was a young woman who was the running, working in the store, and her eyes got really big when she saw me. And it was sort of like, holy smokes, this is Darth Vader who's come into our store. And I told her I was looking for a new headset, very, very calmly. And she said, well, oh, okay. And then she went back behind the counter, and then a guy came out who was the manager of the store. And, he was friendly, and he said, let me help you out, this and that. So anyway, I got the headset, went to the counter. Behind the counter, there was a door, and it was slightly open. That's where all the staff from the store were, and you could see them looking around the corner of the door. It was sort of like, there's Darth Vader. And so I bought the headset, paid for it with a credit card, and I signed the slip back in the days when you have to sign them. And the guy looked around like back and forth, and he slid a piece of paper to me, and he said, could you sign this for my wife? She's not going to believe it. Now, this was a guy who worked in the industry back then. So they're aware. They're people like us who are in there. And anyway, sort of a little anecdote that gives hope, because there are people like us that are within that industry. And that's why I think a lot of the work that we're doing in DC now is showing hope, because we're able to talk to the real people. So anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carlo, and thank you for everything that you've done for the last decades, literally since the 90s on this. And I know you have suffered backlash from the industry, but it hasn't deterred you in forging ahead. And we appreciate your work. I just did a screening of Generation Zapped in Upton on Monday night in Massachusetts. So, the mainstream things that are produced are still getting a lot of traction, and we're so grateful. So thanks, and we look forward to what you may be doing next. Okay, so thank you again, everybody, for joining us tonight. Sorry, I need to have like a Wizard of Oz behind the curtain there to make me do things, right? Okay, let me just release Dr. Carlo there. And I will go ahead and do a screen share that will allow us to go through this issue kind of step by step. And let me bring that up into full screen mode. Okay, here we go. Just 1 second. I think you guys will be able to see it. Deb, can you see this yet? Okay, great. So everything that I'm presenting tonight in my slides, we will provide to the folks who registered for this webinar, and we'll send out both the video and my slides. We suggest that you don't take our word for anything, but that you do your own due diligence so that you can look at the facts for yourself and know this information for yourself, and then perhaps be encouraged to take baby steps to start protecting your own spaces. And once you've done that, maybe come out of your comfort zone and see what you can do to help your community. So that MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And never in a million years did I imagine I would use that and my bachelor in communications to do the work that I'm doing today in technology safety education. But way back in 2013, a decade now, I was running campaigns for my schools when the 21st century classroom was coming into our school classrooms. And we were being told that our kids needed to have all this new technology to succeed in the world. So our budgets were cut to the bone year after year. We certainly didn't have funding for all this technology. So, good doobie parents, we jumped in and started raising the funds for wireless infrastructure, for Chromebooks, for smartboards, for minis, for iPods, for Apple TV, what we thought was all this great new technology. Then a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer was reading a book called Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman. And at book group, she was intimating that there could be something up with wireless. And I just made a mental note of it. But not long after that, another resource crossed my path, inferring once again that wireless was harmful. So being a tech writer, I just thought, is there any science behind this? And that's when I started to scratch the surface. And I learned that you don't even have to scratch very deeply to find literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies all over the world showing extensive biological harm. And with thanks to Dr. Carlo and his colleagues, a lot of those have been published then and since then to help us to refine the science, which we'll go into in just a few moments. So I kind of raised my hands at my schools and said, hey guys, I think we got a problem here, thinking they would respond as if we had a chemical leak in the science lab at school, but they did nothing, crickets. And so I started sharing the science that I was finding with our schools. And ultimately, we became the first public school district here in Ashland, Massachusetts, to even have this little sign hanging in our classroom with best practices for mobile devices that says, turn off all these mobile devices when you're not using them, turn off the Wi-Fi, the access points, the routers when you're not using them, and always place the device on a solid surface away from your body, right? So we became the first in the nation to do that, but I quickly realized they were waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. We had this sign, but they weren't actually implementing it. So I went and met with my legislators, Representative Tom Sanacandro at the time, and then Senator Karen Spilka, and I showed them the science. I measured the radiation coming from their devices, and Senator Spilka put me with an attorney in her office, and together we crafted a very simple bill that would form a commission at the state level to look at this issue and then decide what needs to happen. So that bill was introduced in the winter of 2015, and we've gotten it out of committee a few times, but it's never been passed into law. However, as Deb indicated in her intro, she put me together with herself and Representative Patrick Abrami, and we helped him to craft a bill. And we were able to get that bill through the House, through the Senate, and under Governor Sununu's pen, enacted into law in 7 months' time. And that's where this amazing New Hampshire Commission report came out, documenting what we'll be telling you about here tonight. And we'll also show you current bills that are happening here and around the country. So on this journey, Dr. Deborah Davis, who's a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change, she figured out what was going on with wireless. And somebody in Europe contacted her to see if they could reference her database website, which is the Environmental Health Trust, because they realized we can't fix this problem unless we know about it. So Brett and Lynn West in the UK at the time were starting to put together an online course to quickly train the public. And so Dr. Davis introduced me to them. I volunteered my tech writing skill set. She also introduced Dr. Mikko Ahonen, who's one of the leading scientists out of Finland on wireless radiation. And together, the four of us built out this little nonprofit that we call Wireless Education, where we literally can train the masses in about a half an hour online with our schools and families course. So we invite everybody to just quickly take that. Your entire classroom, your entire school, your entire work office colleagues could all be trained online very quickly. And then here in Massachusetts, Dr. Davis wound up bringing a team of experts to our State House. And for the first couple of years, I was the only person I could speak to about this. And I honestly didn't really know what I was talking about. And then I learned that Dr. Davis was bringing a panel of experts to our State House to ask for right to know legislation. And so I went down to the State House, and it was a standing room only crowd. And it was so gratifying to be among other people who knew this issue existed. And to be there with world-leading experts talking about this. So having met a number of people across the state, within a few years, we formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And then in 2018, somebody found the work that I was doing with education and asked me to co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference held at the National Institutes of Health. And I like to share this link because we were limited to 10 minutes each. So this is a highly credible, quick way to share with others with whom you would like to open the tech safety conversation. I was privileged to do the opening welcome. And then we had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. And he, when he retired, went and researched this with a dozen of the world leading experts and came back and said, the FCC guidelines are not protective, nor are Canada's Safety Code 6 standards. And so he's founded Canadians for Safe Technology. And it's really quite something to have a captain of industry come out and say, my industry needs to do much better on this. They can make it faster, they can make it cheaper, and certainly they can make it safer if given a nudge. We also had Dr. Martin Paul, who's one of the leading scientists, and he walks us quickly through the biological impacts and the mechanisms of harm in our bodies. We had with us Theodora Scarrato, who's now the executive director under Dr. Deborah Davis of the Environmental Health Trust. And she fills us in on what other countries are already doing, where schools and others are removing the wireless exposures because of the health risks. And then we have Peter Sullivan, who's a philanthropist in this area. And Peter had been a fighter pilot in his younger days. And so he was up there, you know, with the Earth's really high natural radiation, the gamma rays, and then being in a fighter plane, all the radar systems on the plane, all the controls of the electromagnetic fields inside the plane. Well, Peter started getting very sick. He dropped a lot of weight. His teeth got very brittle. And then when he became a father, both of his sons, when they came up through the preschool years, both wound up on the autism spectrum. So Peter did what a lot of parents will do, and they will clean out the food toxins and put the family on a clean organic diet. He went so far as to do the heavy metal detox. We know one of the properties of radio frequency radiation is that it amplifies around metal. So he detoxed the heavy metals. And today he will tell you the first line of defense he recommends is do a digital detox. So even if you start with like a 12-hour, no wireless at home, often they find great improvements in health. There's something called a de novo mutation, which means the mutation that caused the autism didn't come from mom's bloodline, didn't come from dad's bloodline. It came from somewhere in the environment. So when you can peel back these environmental exposures, we hear time and again, and we don't want to overpromise anything, but we do hear many, many instances where children or adults on the autism spectrum make great strides by removing the wireless education or the wireless, get the education, but remove the wireless exposures. So we were so honored to have this opportunity down at the NIH. And again, feel free to share this link. And then one of the major gaps we had when I fell down the rabbit hole a decade ago is so many people are getting sick and they go to their doctors like Deb did, and they describe their symptoms. The doctors run the tests they know to run, but they come up empty and say, well, you look to be fine. So then you wind up paying thousands of dollars out of pocket to go see a specialist who runs their tests and comes up empty. And as Deb did, she started doing her own research to see what could cause these symptoms. And that's where she discovered electromagnetic sensitivity. So now we have had 2 major medical conferences that we can now train doctors, nurses, first responders, and all healthcare practitioners how to recognize, diagnose, treat, and most importantly, prevent these electromagnetic illnesses. So we'll use a few terms somewhat interchangeably. In generic terms, this is all microwave man-made radiation. It's also called radio frequency radiation that produces these pulses of electromagnetic fields. So EMFs is electromagnetic fields, RF or RFR is radio frequency radiation, microwave radiation. So it all boils down to the same thing, this man-made energy. There is no safe level identified in the scientific literature. So that's how I got involved. And I want to share with you how my schools became the first in the nation to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms. So anybody with us tonight who has an iPhone, I invite you to take that out and go into settings. Now, our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have a webpage called See the Fine Print, where anybody can go and look up a bunch of the different product disclaimers. But for anybody with the iPhone, if you go into settings, scroll down just a little and hit general. Then in an old phone, you would hit about, but most of those have been retired by now. So from general, go all the way down to legal and regulatory. But I used to like that acronym because you could just say, hey, this gal told me where to find it. And you just remember general about legal. Now you just go general legal. Once you're down at the bottom of general and you hit legal and regulatory, about 4 down on the next screen, you'll see RF exposure. This is this two-way radio frequency, microwave, man-made energy, as they call it in the disclaimer. And they tell us that this device was tested at a distance away from the body. So if you're holding that device in your hand while it's transmitting, if you're tucking it in your bra or your suit pocket or your shirt pocket, or you tuck it in your yoga pants, or you stick it in your back pocket, you're exceeding the FCC public radiation exposure limits, which, by the way, were never biologically safety tested before all this technology came to market. And then if you go down to a subsequent paragraph, it says if you want to reduce your exposures, then you might consider using a headset or a speakerphone. I'm going to take a pause on my screen sharing for just a moment to give you a quick tip here. If you were to use a headset off of a radiating device, that radiation is going to go right up into your brain, right? Whether it be earbuds or a wired traditional headset, you're putting microwave radiation right up to your brain. But for every problem we've created, there are solutions. This is something called a hollow tube headset. This little jack plugs right into your device. There are little tiny adapters you can get for different devices. The metal goes on up. You can clip it onto your person so that it doesn't jerk around. And then you come up to controls that allow you to mute and volume control. And then it goes up to these little ferrite beads that break the radiation, but transfer the sound up through these hollow tubes or air tubes. You can look up a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And notice it's just rubber on the tips. There's no metal going into your brain here because the ambient radiation likes the metal too. So look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset and limit as much as you can the amount of time you're on an active device. At home, I just simply forward my cell phone calls to my landline, and I reserve my cell phone for emergencies only when I'm on the go. So I'm going to go back to my screen share. And the next thing that I want to show you is what this invisible toxin looks like, because it's really hard to get our heads around these invisible toxins. But if COVID taught us anything, it's we need to be vigilant, especially with invisible exposures. So at the EMF medical conference, they recommended this meter to help us see and hear this invisible toxin. It's called the Safe and Sound Pro 2 broadband radio frequency detection meter, and it's put out by a company called Safe Living Technologies. And so that's the one I'll give you a demonstration on in a moment. Back in 2016, I got a grant from my town to put an RF meter into circulation in my public library, and that wasn't easy. It took me 3 grant cycles through which I had to go and literally one by one educate everybody on my select board. And then they offered me funding for 1 meter. I asked for 2. Let's put 1 in circulation at the library. Let's donate 1 to the schools so they can measure and protect the teachers and the students. This was so new to them that the first go round, they said, we don't really, we don't know about this. Come back next time. Second time around, they went, it's probably more of a Board of Health issue. Well, I'd already met with our health director in the town of Ashland, and he didn't know about Wi-Fi. He did know that when the industry was pushing cell towers in, that the industry came in and told our towns through wining and dining and hotel grand ballrooms that, gosh, the Telecom Act of 1996 says if there's any concerns about environmental harm, shucks, they can't sue us over this. So that's how the industry got the laws to reflect their best interest and not ours. So anyway, we piloted this program, and then others around the country have started putting these meters in their libraries too. I met a doctor at the first medical conference in 2019, and she and I went after a state level grant with our cultural council and put 1 into circulation. And more recently out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon has put a cell tower on top of a neighborhood that made 17 children and adults so sick they've had to abandon their homes. Their library supported the funding for this already. And so this ask is much easier today because most of our libraries now have a collection of things, a library of things. So you might well be able to go right to your public library and say, hey, these other towns are doing this. I think this would be a great asset for our town to loan out to the community. So let me know. I can give you some language to make the ask. But I'm going to stop the screen share for a second just to give us a reality check. So because I know what I know and I want to keep myself and my loved ones safe, you see that right here we're flashing in the green area, which is as good as this can get. In the scientific literature, they want this maximum exposure number to be less than 10, and the unit of measurement is called something, it's called a microwatt per square meter. And so right now in my house, I'm at 2.3 because, after I stopped circling my tail on this, I went around to everything that was radiating my house, and I just switched it out for a safe hardwired connection. So I'm at 2 right now, but I want to show you what happens when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode and the antennas begin to radiate to make a connection with the nearest cell tower or router. We are blasted up into the flashing red zone, which is as high as this meter goes. So I'm actually not doing anything. Oh man, I'm gonna put it back into airplane mode, right? And you see it dissipated after a few seconds, and now we're back into this nice, healthier. There's no safe level of microwave radiation, but it's far healthier. We went from 2 microwatts to 2.5 million just by turning on my cell phone and letting those radiating antennas transmit. So that explains a lot of why our society and our environment is getting sicker and sicker as we increase the dose of these environmental exposures. So what does, my local cable station came into my home and we did a 23-minute public service announcement. So you're welcome to watch that. So far, it's helped about 10,000 people learn about this issue and perhaps develop the courage to start, one by one, looking at what's around them. And more recently, I want to give a shout out to the cable station in Worcester, Massachusetts, who invited me in to have my own show. And we've done a dozen episodes now. They're all a half an hour. And we have this tech safe series that you can learn from too, or perhaps even ask your own cable station if they would air these episodes to help educate your own community. So we're very grateful to our local cable stations. And you might find too that your cable station would be delighted to have you on to talk about this issue, because they are one of the last bastions of independent reporting left in our country. Most of mainstream media is now owned by these corporations that turn out to be environmental polluters. So feel free to reach out to your local cable stations. So let's spend a few minutes talking about the science. First, we'll look at the long-term effects, and then on the next slide, we'll look at the short-term effects. So a couple decades ago, our government, through the National Toxicology Program, which is arguably the gold standard of toxics research in the world, they set out to prove that cell phones were safe. Instead, at the end of almost 2 decades of research and reporting, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they could assign, and that should have triggered public policy, but it didn't. Every time a really good study comes out, the industry will get a hold of it and spin it and say, oh, that's just one study, we need more studies, let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, right on the heels of our National Toxicology Program study came out, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy did another large study, not on the cell phones, but on the cell towers, or what some would call base stations. And they found the same findings that we found here in the US. They found the cancerous tumors, the DNA damage, and so on. So we don't need more science. Science can always bring refinement, but we have enough science that we should be protecting and educating the public. One of the findings, again, through these studies and many others, is that this pulsation of spiked, erratic, modulated microwave radiation coming at us at millions and billions of cycles per second is dysregulating our own biological systems and that of the environment. So when I started reading the studies on infertility, that was when I found my voice on this issue. They've taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable, or apoptosis, or programmed cell death, in just 4 hours of exposure to this laptop. And I went, man, you got to be kidding me. My youngest daughter had just gone into high school, and we had gifted her with a laptop for Christmas. My oldest daughter had just gone up to college with her MacBook, and where are both my girls using these devices, but right on top of their reproductive organs. So that was the day that I found my voice and started raising my hand, talking to my schools, going, guys, I think we got a major problem here. So there are further studies. Kaiser Permanente put out a really good study on miscarriage rates being higher among women who are using wireless technology. Neurotoxicity. Dr. Hugh Taylor, who runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical School, has done some of the laboratory studies with rodents, and he saw that after exposing the pregnant mice, that their pups came out bouncing off the walls of their cage, much like a child with attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, she's a pediatric neurologist, and she has identified very close relationships between what's happening to the families in her care and what we know happens with microwave radiation exposure. Dr. Martin Paul, who was one of our guests down at the NIH, he has come out with a paper recently that talks about earlier and earlier onset Alzheimer's. So it used to be that, like cancer, Alzheimer's was a long-term endpoint and the symptoms showed up late in life. But now we're seeing people not just in their 70s and 80s with Alzheimer's, but their 60s, their 50s, their 40s, their 30s, and even in some cases, youngsters in their 20s are being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So as Dr. Martin Blank said in Generation Zapped, if we continue to pollute the environment of the brain, we can expect all sorts of abnormalities to take place. So we have a really hard time getting this information out to the public because much of mainstream media is now owned by the companies that maybe their parent companies own these industries, or they have such high volume of advertising revenue that the networks don't want to go against them, so they don't report on it. So we're very grateful when well-known groups like the Environmental Working Group are able to secure funding to put resources toward educating the public on this. And as a mom, I first learned about the Environmental Working Group because they always put out a yearly list called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen that reflects the produce that we purchase to feed our families. Which ones should you really try to get organic, and which ones might you be able to do all right with grown conventionally? And this is about the pesticides of the foods. So we're very grateful that the Environmental Working Group is now putting out fact sheets. This is one to protect children from wireless radiation in schools and at home. They have another one on cell phones. They have this one over here on neurotoxicity. So we're very grateful. And we need to be mindful that children are not just little adults. Physiologically, they're very different. Their central nervous system is still under construction. Their immune system is still under construction. And we know that this is both a neurotoxin and an immunosuppressant. And when we look at this modeling that Dr. Om Gandhi did, these models are tilted on the side so that the little yellow part represents an ear. And when you put a cell phone up to the ear of an adult, it pulses radiation into our brain about 1/3 of the way through the skull. Children have thinner skulls and higher water content in their brain, and that water radiates, amplifies the radiation more. So on a 10-year-old child with a phone up to their head, it's permeating the brain about 3/4 of the way through. And on a 5-year-old child, it's going almost all the way through and into this child's brain. So these wireless devices are not toys and should never, ever be given to a child with the antennas radiating. So in the short term, a lot of people start recognizing many of these symptoms. We should note that the Americans with Disabilities Act has recognized electromagnetic sensitivities for almost 2 decades now, and they offer recommendations for accommodations. Insomnia is a huge one. And for many years, the industry would say, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified in the scientific literature, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, now the science has progressed far enough that we understand many mechanisms of harm. One of them with insomnia has to do with our circadian rhythm. And in the wee hours of darkness, when the brain thinks it's dark, it releases melatonin from the pineal gland. And the melatonin goes in and does a couple of really important things, like regulating our sleep and helping to clean up the everyday toxin, cell repair and regeneration and all the debris that gets left over from that, escorting that out through the bloodstream. But what the science is telling us is that this microwave radiation is an invisible light energy form. So if we don't know any better and we leave our cell phone on, we leave the Roku on, we leave, the Chromecast and the smartwatch and the tablets and the routers and all of it on at night, pulsing this invisible light, the brain thinks the lights are on, and it doesn't properly release the melatonin that helps to keep our bodies safe and healthy. So if we're not getting the sleep signals, that can explain why so many people are struggling to get through their days because they're not getting a good night's sleep, and then they're not doing proper cell repair. So insomnia is huge. We know why this can play into that. Headaches, nosebleeds, ear bleeds, nausea, chronic fatigue. Another mechanism of harm is something called the rouleau effect. And in my little brain, I liken it to the candy Rolos, that stacked up caramel chocolate. Little bits in there. So what the rouleau effect indicates is that our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and bringing oxygen out to all of our organs and all of our systems to keep us healthy. But what happens when we expose ourselves to electromagnetic fields, these red blood cells start to magnetize and glom together and start stacking up like that stack of Rolos. And then that stack can't get to where it needs to bring the oxygen. And so we now find ourselves in conditions of oxidative stress, which is the precursor to many chronic illnesses today. And Dr. Cindy Russell founded Physicians for Safe Technology, and she says it's like we're rusting ourselves from the inside out with this oxidative stress. Pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities. So I've learned that we have like little antennas in the surface of our skin that help us to navigate in our world and keep us safe. When we bombard those antennas with all this man-made microwave radiation, we get people who talk about the hot ear. We get people who get skin flushing and rashes and itching and tingling in the skin. So we know that it has a big impact there. And then our heartbeat, that's another major electrical organ that we're dysregulating. Depending on your individual proclivity, your heart might go too fast or it might go too slow, or it might not go at all. Cognitive impairment is a big one. It used to be as we aged, we would have our senior moments, but now we have kids, teenagers having this cognitive impairment, anger and behavior issues. So there have been brain scans that have been done that show that this microwave radiation is actually changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain. And one of the things that really just frightened me so much at the EMF medical conference was where more than one of the doctors said, if we don't get ahead of this and we are changing the brain, we can expect to see many more of these outbursts of anger, the mass shootings, the violent outbreaks that we're seeing throughout society if we don't stop radiating ourselves and our brains. And even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression, and we were seeing suicidal ideation even among kids like we've never seen before. And how long have we been radiating our children at home, in schools, in our cars, in our churches, where the industry targets our churches and temples and mosques, because they usually have a high point up to heaven. And that's where the industry likes to put their cell antennas so it can have a broad reach. So many people recognize a lot of those symptoms. And the good news is that with just a little education like we're doing today, people will say, gosh, I didn't want to know this. I don't want to believe it, but I could relate to a lot of that. So I took a chance and I took your advice and I created a sleep sanctuary. And oh my gosh, I slept through the night for the first time, or my children's behavior issues went way down, or we're seeing a great reduction in anxiety and depression, all these symptoms that if we just give our body a chance to repair itself, quite often we see drastic improvement with very short time. So unfortunately, it's not just impacting you and I, it's every biological cell on the planet. And so if you go to this link, Planetary Impact, you'll find these resources, and you'll learn more about what it's doing to our poor pollinators and our birds. There are studies done on the bees and other pollinators that show that this radiation is contributing greatly to the colony collapse. It's dysregulating, all these guys have these beautiful built-in navigation systems that are meant to be synchronized with the Earth's natural electromagnetic field. And there's a gentleman by the name of Schumann who figured out just how often the Earth pulses electromagnetic fields. And when you and I connect to the Earth, we get these really healthy, beautiful electrons that come up and help to regulate all of the chemistry and electricity in our bodies. Schumann discovered that the Earth pulses at 7.83 times per second. Now, when we look at our digital technology in the megahertz range, it pulses 1,000,000 times per second. And in the gigahertz range, it pulses at a billion times per second. And we're supposed to be at 7.83. So when we jackhammer ourselves with pulse spiked microwave radiations 24/7, not only does it dysregulate us, but it creates this huge layer of electrosmog that interferes with what the birds and the bees and all the other creatures out there are meant to be connected to the Earth to navigate with and to do what they do to help keep us well fed, right? So that's a big issue with the plants, the birds, the bees, all of it. And then when we look at it through the lens of energy consumption, way back in 2012, there was a Greenpeace analyst who said, if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was more than a decade ago. And we've only added on exponentially. And now with the industry trying to roll out 5G and the Internet of Things, they want you to have hundreds of devices connected to the internet. So energy consumption is huge. And then Katie Singer and others have extensive information about the human atrocities that are going into extracting dozens of minerals that go into each one of our devices, that the industry just comes in and says, hey, we have a new shiny object, get rid of that old one. Well, if we really understood the humanitarian toll and the earth toll of what we're really doing here, we would never just toss aside a perfectly fine device to get the shiny new one. We would use everything to its full and useful life and make sure we recycle at the end of the life cycle. Then all of our data warehouses, our networks, our personal devices are constantly using energy. Streaming consumes huge amounts. Every time we send and receive, every time we charge and recharge our wireless devices. And then in the background, we've been talked into all these sexy apps and we put them on our devices. If we're honest, we probably don't use most of them, but they're in the background using energy for constant updates. So little by little, we learn to choose hardwired technology, which uses the least amount of energy. And again, it's not rocket science. You simply hardwire with Ethernet cables and adapters, go in and turn off all the antennas. Once you download your information, you don't need to have any antennas on. If you're completely hardwired, you don't have any antennas on anyway. But if you're on the go, at least download everything, then turn off the antennas and you can enjoy whatever is right on your device. So I've touched upon a little bit about why we don't know. Why, and I've mentioned that mainstream media is owned by these industries. And so back in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this incredible report called Captured Agency, how the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And notice this graphic they use, which is a revolving door. And that represents that the FCC, the FDA, other agencies are no longer independent scientists and experts representing the public interest. These are guys who have gotten seats on all of our agencies and they're now running our country. And they're looking out for their own best interests. So captured agency was like my missing puzzle piece. I'm like, oh, you mean nobody up there has our backs? So that's why I do what I do and so many others do what they do at the local level to affect local change, and then move it up through the state and eventually push it up at the federal level. So Captured Agency came out in 2015, and this past November, ProPublica also did another expose on how the FCC shields cell phone companies from safety concerns. And remember that $30 million study that our government did, that was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration to go in and find out if cell phones are safe. And there were different people running the FDA back then. Today, the gentleman who's in charge of the radiation area for devices is Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. And when you just take a little peek into his background, you discover that he is married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry and other environmental polluters to the tune of, billions of dollars. So Dr. Shuren should have never been anywhere near that NTP study. And in fact, what he did is he went over to his buddies at the FCC and said, hey, we don't really believe that study. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Right? So the FCC has been sued for ignoring the science since then, and we're waiting for some pressure that's being applied to get them to do their job. And unfortunately, we've discovered this corruption and conflict of interest goes all the way up to the World Health Organization, which again, the innocent public would think, oh, they've got our backs, but no, there's two groups at the WHO. One of them is very heavily funded by industry, and they don't have experts who really know the science, but they are the ones who are pushing out, blockages and false information to the public. But once those two big studies came out from the MTP and the Ramazzini Institute, that there was enough evidence of harm. So back in 2011, there was an investigation at the World Health Organization, and they determined this was a group 2B possible human carcinogen in the same category as lead and thalidomide and a chloroform and a whole host of other chemicals that I can't even pronounce. And what was missing at the time were the animal studies. And now that we have those, there is a calling to reclassify this not as group 2B probable, but as a known human carcinogen. So they have reopened their investigation, but you'll be hard pressed to find it online because, again, there are captured organizations up there. So if you just go do a search, you'll find old stuff that say it's inconclusive, but we can provide you with their new thing here if you go to this link. So they have reopened it, but it looks like they're stacking the deck again to put industry up there on this new panel that's looking at this. So that's all the bad news. Let's start focusing a bit on the good news and show you what you do have control over. So on the back of your router or on the bottom, flip it over or around and you'll see that you have Ethernet ports there. Simply plug in an Ethernet cable and run it to wherever you use your technology in your home or your office or your schools. And you want to look for something called a shielded Ethernet cable if you're going to buy something new. That just means there's a foil liner around the wires in there. And what that does is it prevents any dirty electricity coming off of the wire through electric and magnetic fields, which is another form of man-made energy. So most people have more than one device they'd like to hardwire, and you can simply buy a little thing called an Ethernet switch. You can think of it as like an extension cord, an extension box for electronics. So you would plug the one from your router into one port on here, and then get yourself some shorter Ethernet cables that go right to your devices, or if your devices don't have an Ethernet jack or port anymore, you can just buy little adapters for most devices today, for the cell phones, for the tablets, for the laptops. And so the first step is to just hardwire. And you can see from the prices here, it won't break the bank for most people. So plug everything in, and then you have to remember to go into the devices and turn off all the antennas. I had to call my internet service provider and say, hey, I've chosen to hardwire my house for a better signal. It's faster, it's more reliable, it's more safe, it's greener. But that triple play box that came with my internet, cable, and phone service is still pulsating in the red zone. So how do I turn that off? And they said, oh, that's easy. Sit down at your computer. And I said, really? And they said, yeah. And they walked me into how to get to my account online. They showed me where to go to the wireless settings. And at that time, there were two antennas. One was for the 2.4 gigahertz antenna, and one was for the 5 gigahertz antenna. And all I had to do was say off, apply. And then I waited a few minutes and I went down to my basement in the utility closet where our, triple play box was. And I measured, and it was radio silence. And I thought, all right, we got all those antennas. But with 5G and the Internet of Things, they literally want to hook up everything you buy to the internet so they can harvest your data and sell that data off to third-party vendors who would be interested in knowing what you like to buy. And others may say for more nefarious reasons, they're doing data harvesting on your personal choices and your whereabouts and all that. But my work centers around the health issues. So step 1 is to hardwire. Step 2 is to disable every antenna. And step 3 is to measure, because you never know if you've got multiple antennas in there that you got to track down. And as I mentioned earlier, when you're not on the go, you don't need mobile technology. Simply forward your devices to your cell phone. And some folks who have to work with a cell phone have trained themselves to keep it in airplane mode as a rule. and then just set an alarm on it, because in airplane mode with the Wi-Fi turned off, not just not connected, but off. Otherwise it's still going, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? So that you want those antennas off for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, as well as all your cellular and the rest of them in there. But you really have to measure. But people who have to work with a cell phone will keep it in airplane mode. Then you can use your alarms, you can use your clock, you can use your camera, and any other application that's downloaded onto the device, you can use it in airplane mode. So just set an alarm to go off however often you want, every half hour or so. And then set it aside from you, let it go and send up and send and receive, and then put it right back in airplane mode, and then pick it up and compose your responses to texts and emails, and then set it away from you and transmit again. So there are little hacks for everything if you really want to use technology safely. So that can be our goal. You want to create a sleep sanctuary above all else, because if you're not getting good sleep, there's that whole domino effect where your health starts to collapse. So that's what you have direct control over in many cases. Let's talk about a few other areas where these exposures have come into our communities that you may or may not have control over. And the first is the utility smart meters. So when I was a little kid, I'm one of 10 kids, and so we'd be playing hide and seek outside, and I'd be hiding in the bushes, and to keep myself busy while all those kids are trying to find one another, I just watched the little dials go around on the analog meter that we had for electric or gas or water, and today now we have solar and propane. The industry has talked our towns into a perceived cost save. So, hey, you can save money by not having to send a walker through the neighborhood to get the reading to do the billing off of your utility meters. We can put digital meters on that will send that data wirelessly to the company. Or there's an intermediate one where, like in my neighborhood, there's somebody in a truck that drives by once a month, points his scanner at my meter, picks up my reading, and then leaves. I learned from the water company that they come into the neighborhood, they activate all of the meters at once, and then they go do their drive-bys. And then when they leave the neighborhood, they turn it all off. So we're only radiated by that for a few minutes every month. But with these electric meters and these smart meters that they're putting on, they are pulsing radiation 24/7 that is making a lot of people sick. So we mentioned that radiation likes metal. And so this radio frequency can actually hop on the pipes or the wiring of your home and turn your entire home into this giant radiating antenna. So that's a big risk. And then a lot of them are not properly installed, or if there's a lightning strike or a short circuit, these things can catch fire and explode, or if there's improper grounding. And again, there's data harvesting and privacy issues. And at the medical conferences, they've been telling us that this is one of the leading causes of sudden onset microwave sickness. So yeah, we care deeply about who's near that in the near field, but also the way it transfers all over the home. And then one house sends their meter reading to the next house that sends it to the next house, and it aggregates as it goes. And then it goes to a collection station. So down the line, you might be getting more and more radiation than the first house on the block there. And this is another big environmental justice issue. We see many of these corporate polluters go into communities, promote the benefits of their products, and then say, hey, it was successful here, so now we're going to roll it out across the whole state. And that's what National Grid did here in Worcester, Massachusetts. They came in with their smart grid pilot program and started putting these smart meters on everybody's homes in Worcester, which is an environmental justice community, low income, minority, where people are working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over the head. They don't have time to tune into these types of issues in many cases. So it becomes an easy sell for these toxic corporations to come in. And Worcester National Grid went way over budget. They wanted to turn around and put that cost back on the customers, the ratepayers. And so our Attorney General's office got involved. But they only knew about the economic considerations, and we've been trying to educate them on the biological effects as well. Jeremy Johnson is he was a Silicon Valley engineer married to a medical doctor, and both he and his wife became very sick rather suddenly, had no idea, and nothing in her medical training could help them figure out what was going on until they figured out it was a bank of smart meters that went in at their condo. And so Jeremy's got an excellent TED Talk here. So being an engineer, this might be a resource you want to share with others who are in the technical trades like engineers or physicists or technologists. And then Dr. Alexia McKnight, who's a veterinary radiologist, she got fried by the smart meter on her home to the point where she couldn't remember when she was out in traffic if a green light meant stop or go. So Dr. Alexia McKnight has now done a TED Talk on this as well. Okay, the next source of community level exposure is the cell towers. And it's critically important to look at what the non-industry funded science is recommending. And they're saying that at a minimum, any of these cell towers, whether they're small cells or these big macro cell antennas, should never be placed any closer than 500 meters, which is 1,640 feet, because in the societal or epidemiological studies, there's this death and neurotoxicity curve that starts to come down to catch up with normal population trends. It starts coming down at that 500 meter mark. It doesn't actually catch up to the normal populace until about double that at like 3,000 feet. So it's critically important not to look at what the industry is telling us, but what the science is telling us. And there's a website here in the US called antennasearch.com. You can put in any address and it'll give you a return search and tell you how many antennas and how many cell towers are within a 3-mile radius. And oh my gosh, I did my home and there's a couple hundred antennas nearby. I put in the State House address in downtown Boston, and there were 1,520 towers and 4,512 antennas, just pummeling Boston. And this is what one neighborhood in Boston looks like, and look how dense that is. So we are literally under the gun with all this toxic infrastructure. And now the industry is adding an entire new layer with 5G. So I mentioned before that my triple play box down in my utility closet had a 2.4 gigahertz antenna and a 5 gigahertz antenna. Sometimes people confuse gigahertz with generation with the 5G. So when you're talking about the signals that are coming out of a device or a tower, that's the gigahertz. When we talk about 5G as a marketing term, that's 5th generation. The G stands for generation. So about every 10 years, a new generation of technology is introduced. And the industry is selling it as faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways. But when we take a look, they turn this into yet another revenue stream because they are buying up the industry for entertainment, for which they are now promising faster download speeds. And with our 3G and 4G waves, they're big enough to be able to get through objects. So that's how, if you're inside your building or your school or your home, the cell tower signals can reach inside your home and connect with your device. Those are these longer wavelengths. They've pretty much maxed out the profitability on those. They're all but used up. All that's left to monetize are these tiny little millimeter waves. And they're spinning it as, faster data transfer. But these little waves get disrupted by objects such as rain or snow or leaves or trees. And so in order for 5G to fly today, they have to partner it and use the backbone of the existing cell towers or add even more as they start building out. They want more and more capacity because they're selling more and more technology with 5G. So they put the cart before the horse And they start saying, oh, gee, everybody wants 5G, so we need more capacity, which means we need more cell towers. And what that means is they're adding these short millimeter waves. Their goal to supply all that demand is to put a cell tower every 2 to 12 houses, not in industrial parks far away from residential zoning, as it used to be, but right inside our neighborhoods at the curb, right outside our bedroom windows, every 2 to 12 houses. That's what 5G is. And we get report after report of the industry coming in, sometimes literally under the cover of darkness, clear cutting the trees and putting these antennas up. And the kicker is, Senator Richard Blumenthal was at a congressional hearing in DC with the Commerce Committee, and he said to these two industry representatives, so please tell us, how much money has the industry invested in independent science to prove this is safe before it came to market? And both of the industry guys kind of hemmed and hawed and then ultimately said, well, gee, we don't actually know of any independent science that's been done. So Senator Blumenthal says, so as far as health and safety is concerned, we're flying blind here. And that's what these industries do. And even Computer World and others are saying, well, wait a minute here. You know, they're promising all these faster speeds, but we're clocking it and we're not even getting it faster than what we already have with 4G. 5G is a bad joke. And it is, but there went Verizon last year sending out press releases that woohoo, 100 million Americans now have access to 5G from Verizon. And this is not a popular topic. My own state rep turned his back on me when I mentioned COVID-19. And I think he misunderstood. I wasn't saying that the pandemic was caused by 5G. What the evidence, however, is showing is that in areas where 5G has been activated, there were higher cases of COVID and there were higher death rates of COVID. And when we look at ourselves biologically, the more burden we put on, the less our cells are able to keep up. So there's a Dr. Ronald Kostoff out of Georgia Tech who's done some papers with colleagues on this. And he said one of the big misses that our government did with COVID is that usually when there's a pandemic or a bad virus like this, you look at three prongs. You look at first the virus itself and try to understand that. You look at the host, the people that are being infected, and then you look at the environmental factors that are contributing to this. Well, our government never addressed the environmental factors and how important it is to reduce that toxic load on our immune systems. So that Dr. Rubik and Dr. Brown paper is really good at explaining perhaps why there were so many more cases and deaths where 5G was active. Dr. Magda Habas was one of the co-chairs of the EMF Medical Conference, and up in Trent University in Canada, she taught radio frequency radiation for 25 years. She's now retired and has started this global EMF monitoring project because she recognizes our governments are not stepping up to monitor all of this cumulative exposure that's going on. So she's inviting citizen scientists like you and I, who will invest in one of these Safe and Sound Pro 2 meters, to go out and use a protocol on your own clipboard and document your findings in a particular scientific way. Deb Hodgson and I have gone out together. We did Concord, New Hampshire at their capital. We did her town of Stratham. I've done so with other members of my communities down here in Massachusetts. And then we just enter our data into the database. And Dr. Havas nicknamed this her brag project. Can you brag about the radiation levels in your area? And the acronym BRAG stands for B is for black, where it's so bad you're in the blackout zone. R is for red, where we're in a danger zone. A is for amber, where we're heading into trouble. And G is for green, where we're less than 1,000 microwatts per square meter. And that 1,000 microwatts per square meter outdoors came from a conference in Salzburg years ago with many of the experts around the world, who determined so long as you're not like staying right under the transmitting antennas, if we could get to 1,000 outdoors, that might be okay, provided you can get home into a safe environment where your body might properly cell repair and regenerate at night. So if anybody's interested in becoming a global scientist with Dr. Havis, please go out to globalemf.net. Rob Metzinger, who owns Safe Living Technologies, offers a discount to the citizen scientists. So if you would like to purchase the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter to participate in this study and to have for your own use, just let them know that through their contact page, and they will send you a discount code. Okay, so we want to be at 1,000 or less outside, and we just want to give you a quick rundown of what our societies are looking like today. Up outside of the fire department in Westmoreland, New Hampshire, in the green, up in Keene, New Hampshire. It was in the yellow. I've just gotten word that they're turning on 5G small cells at close range, so we anticipate that that has gone up. Nashua is already in the red, Concord in the red, Stratham's in the blackout. Here in Boston, we have these antennas that are going in to the north end. This is our wonderful neighborhood, the Italian section, where we've got these amazing restaurants and bakeries, but there are also above the shops, apartment buildings that have been there for generations. And these seemingly beautiful wrought iron light posts are actually small cells right there at the curb where thousands of tourists traffic all year long. And people live right outside of these. So when you go down Hanover Street, which is the main strip, you see these pretty wrought iron cell towers. When you look down the cross streets, you see that they put these ugly gray monopoles right outside people's bedroom windows there. So this is already happening. But Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that when important societal changes finally happen, it comes through three main channels. One, the public becomes educated and decides that they're not going to stand for this. So that's what we're hoping to inspire with our talks. It goes through the courts, and the guilty are eventually held accountable. And in the end, public policy catches up to, in this case, the science. So as I said, we'll give you my slides so you can go through the next few slides on your own time in more detail, but I'll call out a few of the highlights. So the FCC has been sued by the Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, and a number of other organizations that were all pulled together into this one lawsuit that they won. And it was sent back to the FCC to say, you need to account for the science on the environment, on impacts to children, on fertility, and so on. And it's been nearly 2 years and the FCC has not done one thing. So Environmental Health Trust early on poked in with the courts to say, hey, please stay on this. And recently, Children's Health Defense just filed another petition with the courts to get the FCC to do their job. So there are lots and lots of lawsuits that have happened all over the country. I mentioned here in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon put a cell tower on top of this neighborhood that caused 17 children and adults to abandon their homes because they were all getting very sick. Even their pets, all their pollinators have disappeared. For the first time in the United States, their city council ordered their Board of Health to investigate, which they did for 15 months. They spoke to the scientists, they spoke to the doctors who have given diagnoses of electromagnetic sensitivity, they spoke to engineers who understand radio frequency, and they also listened to the industry so-called expert. They brought in this Dr. Eric Swanson. Listen to him saying, oh, microwave radiation's fine, it's all under the FCC limits, it's all good. Well, they investigated him and discovered that Dr. Eric Swanson has never published one single paper on microwave radio frequency emissions. His specialty as a physicist is in quarks and other physics properties. So they're, parading this guy around who's not even an expert. And then what the Board of Health did is they documented that finding, they documented the science, the harm, and they issued an emergency order to Verizon, asking them to please come to the table and let's talk about this. There were already commercial properties in Pittsfield that said, we don't care, he can move the cell tower here if they want. We don't have any residences near us. But Verizon, instead of coming to the table, they went to the courts and put an injunction against the Board of Health. And the Board of Health had done their due diligence. They had gone to their state level Association of Health Boards and spoke to the attorneys up there. And what they discovered is that, yes, the Telecom Act does say that you can't complain about environmental exposures in the application process for a cell tower. However, once something goes into the community, if it's a nuisance or it's causing harm to the people or the environment, it is the legal duty of the Board of Health to stop that. And so they had asked the attorneys at the state level, what would it take if we have to defend this in court? And it was, there were two pathways they could have gone, and all told, it would have only been about 84,000 maybe. So when Verizon got this injunction against the Pittsfield Board of Health, the Board of Health went to their mayor, Linda Tyre, the city solicitor, Pagnotta, and their city council and said, we would like to request this funding to take this to court to get these poor people back into their homes. And it looks to be there are conflicts of interest with the mayor, the city solicitor, certain members of their city council, and they would not give their own Board of Health the funding to execute what they had ordered them to do. So the Board of Health was basically coerced or bullied into rescinding their emergency order. So the citizens, along with Children's Health Defense, are now suing Verizon. They're suing the property owner. They're suing Linda Tyre, the mayor, the city solicitor, the city council, and they had to also include the Board of Health in that. And the Board of Health understands that this is just the way it has to go. So in April, there was a court hearing to see if they could move forward with this lawsuit, and they are going to be able to move forward with identifying that the Board of Health has grounds to stand on. And so we're very hopeful that that will come through before the end of this year. So these are groundbreaking things that you can share with your own towns, with your own legislators, and the Massachusetts Board of Health Association has legal guidelines right now that includes 4 pages on cell towers. So feel free to share these resources. And these lawsuits are happening all over the country and all over the world. And as I mentioned, Deb's state rep, Patrick Abrami, is the first one to ask these really important questions through a bill that became law. Why have Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, and other world-leading reinsurers already recognize radio frequency as a leading world risk, and they do not offer coverage? So that leaves our towns holding the bag for damages. That's serious legal risk exposure. Why does that fine print even exist? And why is the FCC dropping the ball and nobody's looking at the cumulative effects? So we got that first law passed in a year. That led to more bills down the way that the industry keeps derailing. Maine has opened up a new bill this session, again, to form a commission, and their House has unanimously passed this bill. It went to the Senate, industry got to the Senate. I guess their Senate committee on this area of science, tech, and energy has long been run by heavy ties to industry. But it went back to the House for a second vote, and they once again unanimously voted that this bill needs to get passed. So now there's more pressure on the Senate, and we're waiting to see what will happen there. Connecticut had a bill to address small cells and smart meters, and here in Massachusetts, we have 6 bills this session. This is our commission bill and child protection bill that we just had a hearing on this week. We want to protect our kids in schools, and we want to, at a minimum, let people opt out of these toxic smart meters, but we should never be putting those on homes to begin with. And then there are bills to protect our civil rights and to establish a registry of harm at the state level so that our boards of health and our healthcare practitioners can actually report in the number of patients who are presenting with microwave or electromagnetic illnesses. So there's a lot going on. There are other bills in other states that you can investigate. And there are actions happening all over the country. The industry comes into our towns, though, and says, oh, you know, your hands are tied. Please just approve this application. We'll give you a little kickback. You'll get a revenue stream. You'll have faster service. It's a win-win for everybody. And by the way, if anybody objects to this, those are just the NIMBYs, the not in my backyards, who just don't want it, you know, obstructing their view or whatever. Well, that's simply not true. There are more than 150 groups all across our country and growing that are dealing with this at the local level. So you can go through and learn a lot about that here. City of Boston has filed against this a number of times. Burlington came out with a small cell policy that had Verizon withdrawing their 7 small cell applications because they insisted that they come back every year and recertify that these things are still compliant according to current law, and that the industry would have to pay for that recertification. And they know they want to put millions of these in everywhere, so they don't want to lose any of their bottom line. So they just took away their applications. It was great. And now others are emulating that. So lots of great resources in here. A grandma in Easton, Connecticut figured out 5G, went to her town, and they have put a moratorium on any further build out until it can be proven safe. And they've re-upped that moratorium as well. So these things are happening all over the world. I want to spend a minute talking about our schools. The industry got in there with their 21st century classroom and started poisoning our kids. It's telling to see this expose 3-part story that the New York Times did, showing us that Silicon Valley executives are banning screens from their children. In fact, they're having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their kids. And they're sending their kids to schools not with hardwired technology, but no technology, because they know a child's brain best develops through meaningful interaction with the adults in their lives, with their peers, with the natural environment, not behind a screen. It can be used as an accessory tool, but that is not where kids should be spending most of their time. And great thanks to our friends, Doug and Patty Wood at Grassroots Environmental Education, which is a nonprofit that has garnered recognition from the Environmental Protection Agency for the work that they've done to keep other pollutants out of our schools. They have launched this Tech Safe Schools national program. You can contact them, provide them with the names and the contact information of the administrators in your school, and they have gotten funding to send packets out to teach the health risk, the legal risk for radiating the kids and the teachers, and most importantly, solutions for remediating. So they've got a great toolkit online that you're welcome to go look at. The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has come up now with K through 12 curriculum. So we actually have curriculum to train our schools with for the kids and the students, or the kids and the teachers. Dr. Alexia McKnight and I were invited into her children's schools for Professional Development Day, and we did 4 seminars on this, and we'd be happy to do that for your schools, or you can share this video. Again, we have this little course. We can train the entire school district in about a half an hour. And then our friends at Environmental Health Trust have all sorts of handouts and resources at your fingertips. They also worked very hard with the state of Maryland that has now come out with a fact sheet saying that we should be hardwiring our schools and not radiating the kids. The U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools does Green School certification, and Dr. Tony Stein worked really hard to get them to adopt a module for low EMF best practices as well. Cypress has safety recommendations for studying at home that they came out with during the pandemic. You know, because parents were working, kids were given these tablets with no safety instructions. I think the kids got a lot more free rein on these devices than ever, and they got much more radiation than ever, and these kids are getting sicker than ever. So there are safety recommendations from other countries that we can look to. And then the first textbook has now come out, with great thanks to Dr. Panagopoulos out of Greece, who organized experts all over the world to do different chapters in here. And this can now be used in our medical schools to teach how to recognize, diagnose, treat, and prevent these electromagnetic illnesses. Physicians for Safe Technology has an amazing website that's highly credible. You can send your own medical teams to, and then there's all sorts of resources for the other professions as well. And for us at home, if you're not a do-it-yourselfer, your electrician can come in and just put Ethernet jacks all over. But if you want to bring in a building biologist to measure whether it be the radiation or the mold or, you know, VOCs and formaldehyde, they're all highly skilled and trained to do that through the Building Biology Institute. Generation Zapped is a great film that's still highly relevant. It came out in 2018 and it's now available on Amazon Prime, and many of our libraries now give it to their patrons for free through their streaming services. So Bert Wolf from PBS collaborated with Camilla Reese and Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe and others, and PBS has 2 half-hour episodes on this. And then our friends at Grassroots Environmental Education also have a project called Americans for Responsible Technology, where they are literally giving you the tools to start this conversation in your community. And this is what their toolkit page looks like. They have a page where they list all those other groups that have already formed. Maybe you'll find somebody near you that you can just sync up with, or they have a whole toolkit for helping you to get started. And these are nice resources too, to recognize that it's not just the radiation, it's what we're doing with our time. And many of us fallen into the trap of just using our screens as our go-to place. And we've lost sight of how critically important it is to be outside in nature, get all that good healing energy, and model good behavior for others, especially the children in our life. I love this poster, 50 Ways to Take a Break, with all these wonderful reminders of things that we do to fill ourselves up again, and to be kind to others and to be kind to our environment, and just get out and have fun and do creative things to keep our brains nice and stimulated. And then The Earth Prescription is a book that Dr. Laura Conover wrote. She's a medical doctor, and she is teaching us how to really garner all that healing energy from the earth. And, you know, elite athletes use earthing or grounding to keep themselves in tip-top shape. And there's a whole nother body of science around grounding. But this is an amazing book. I loved it because I had read the science and I'm like, well, yeah, but not real practical where I live in the Northeast to be walking around barefoot 6 months out of the year. But Dr. Conover takes it by all 4 seasons and teaches us how we can continue to ground naturally all throughout the year. Lots of fun things in there to do. So how do you open this conversation with your town that's been so seduced by industry or threatened to be sued if they don't approve all these applications? So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already has something called the ALARA principle, which means we want to get to radiation levels as low as reasonably achievable. And they have 3 prongs for that. Spend as little time in a radiating environment as you can. Create as much distance as you possibly can from anything that's radiating. And if you can't get away from it entirely, then you should be shielding it. And those 3 principles apply to this kind of radiation as well, but the CDC hasn't owned up to it yet because we have yet another captured agency. So that's our goal, is to get to as low as reasonably achievable. We have lots of resources here. This is my personal research repository where I've gathered up a bunch of resources for municipal leaders and just help them to understand that we need to differentiate between the industry priorities and what they're telling us versus the public's priorities. Dr. Timothy Sheckley and Camilla Reese and others have this free online publication called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks, that teach our communities how to go about hardwiring with sustainable technology, because wireless has to keep getting replaced. We want hardwired fiber optics or high-speed cable or copper right to the building, and then you just simply hook up with wires indoors. And again, it's critical to always measure the exposures and not against FCC guidelines because they were never protective, but against the biological effects. And we know how to teach you what those numbers are. So for next steps, we can't kid ourselves into thinking there's any safe level of man-made radiation because there's not. So we want to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who retired from one of the top science posts in our country as the head of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, she said that there are definitely captured agencies, but there are still some really good people at the federal level. But they need to be empowered from the grassroots up through the local and the state levels so that they can do their job. So we educate the public. I do these free public education webinars with our friends at New Hampshire for Safe Technology twice a month. And we'll always have these posted out at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And if you're on our list, we'll send out those reminders to you. We can be brought in to do forums like we've done with these other towns. But please, let's think about getting our schools trained on this as soon as possible so we can protect our kids. And then start where you are, because all of us are tied into certain groups, and all these professional associations are always looking for speakers for their conferences and their quarterly meetings and stuff. And I and others would be honored to be brought in to open this important conversation. So locally, our town should be forming technology safety committees because technology is definitely here to stay. They should learn about the reason why they should never let the industry put in these smart meters, especially without an opt-out. And then we need to start transitioning to hardwired in public spaces. And then most importantly for our towns, if we don't have it in our local zoning bylaws that we've got protections put in place, there's not enough time to change your zoning bylaws by the time the industry is handing you applications for cell towers or small cells, because there's a shot clock at the federal level that says if they want to put something up on an existing pole, your town has to approve or deny with a written reason if they're denying it within 60 days of that application coming in, or if they're going up on a new structure, 90 days, but that's not enough time to change your zoning. So our towns have only heard their hands are tied, but our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology and others have a whole checklist. How do our zoning bylaws currently stack up? And here's all the things you should put in there that will stand up in a court of law. And our town should not be afraid to hire an expert. Andrew Campanelli is one of the best. He used to work for industry until he discovered what they were doing. And then he switched teams, and now he represents towns and individuals. And he can rewrite a town zoning code for about $8,500, which is pretty short change compared to what it's going to cost if you get sued in court by the industry or the citizens who are now starting to sue their towns for not protecting them. So most town attorneys are good doobies, but they are simply unmatched to go up against the industry unless they are telecom experts. Okay. So for today, we apologize. We know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose, but do what you can do. Notice what is radiating. Start with baby steps. You can't do it all at once. Above all else, what can you do to create a sleep sanctuary? Because if you don't get good sleep, your body can't get you where you need to go. And then make your way to transitioning to Ethernet cables and adapters. Use airplane mode as much as you can. And then look at these great resources. This is just a few of what our friends at Environmental Health Trust has for you to start these conversations credibly. Okay, so thank you so much for giving so generously of your time tonight. We've got a few minutes left. Here's where you can reach out to New Hampshire for Safe Technology, either directly through email or at their Facebook page. This is our website here. And if you go to massforsafetech@gmail.com, you can reach me directly. So I'll stop sharing. And if Deb hasn't gone by the wayside with the storm that she's up against there, I'll ask if there are any questions that we can field, or if anybody wants to raise a hand to ask any questions.
There was a question in the chat from Kathy about what's the problem with fiber. I know a couple people had tried to answer that. I don't know if you have thoughts on that. And then Janet has her hand up.
Okay, so my understanding, one of the issues with fiber is like with all the rest of this technology, it may come in full tilt, like full energy ahead, and maybe you don't need that much. People who are electromagnetically sensitive, that might be too much for them. But Jeremy Johnson at emfanalysis.com, he has some insights for you there, and he's a techie, so he can talk you through that a little bit better. So I would recommend go see Jeremy Johnson at emfanalysis.com. He also does online consultations you can sign up for on his website. Okay, Janet, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
I just wanted to say I was interested to find out in Maine, the high school put on the play Radium Girls, which when I started to look into all this, I learned about the Radium Girls who put the dials on the clocks in the 1920s and were licking radium, and and how what amazed, I realized for the students, it's like a civics lesson and education and how we're not protected and all those things. And it was put on in high schools, I think, across the country this year and done well. It's a horrible story and they did it well. It didn't beat you over the head, but made the point. Anyway, off topic, but related.
No, but nice. It's always nice to know of other resources out there. Oh, speaking of resources, there's a building biologist, two building biologists, and an illustrator, Chris McPhee and Scott Ricker, illustrated by Ethan Rothler. Look at this adorable book called The Wishing Tree that's just come out this year. It's The Wishing Tree, a building biology inspired fairy tale. So it's about a mom who becomes environmentally ill, and the little girl and the little boy go through this magical adventure where they discover things that they can bring back to mom with lessons learned on how to remove the exposures in the environment from chemicals and mold and EMFs. So for anybody who's suffering from electromagnetic illness, this might be a really nice way to help the loved ones in your life understand what is happening. So that's pretty cool. That's a new one.
Kathy has her hand raised.
Oh,
Okay,
yes.
go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, hello. Yes, I'm glad to finally meet you, Cece. Listen, I want to tell you, in Eugene, 3 towers, the small G, 4G enhanced, they call them maybe now, but were put within plus or minus 40 feet of 3 women activists in Eugene. And one was not even a wireless activist. The other 2 were very prominent wireless activists. And I want to say a few words about what Magda Voss had said about the millimeter waves are extremely short. And that's why they want to put them every 300 to 700 feet within urban environments. And she had some documents declassified in 2010 from the CIA have been given to her. And it says that the millimeter wave studies that were done back in the 60s and 70s last century in Eurasia indicated they could penetrate through the rabbit and rat skin into organs. And this is something Dr. Martin Paul, whom I know now for since about 2011 when I heard him in Portland, he's spoken in Eugene a couple times. Dr. Paul has done quite a bit of studying in the last year, during the lockdown period about the electromagnetic. And he said the electric is not as bad as the magnetic that can pierce through the skin. And that's why the active denial system that the, non-lethal weapons have been using on the streets to control crowds are part of that whole technology. So I wanted to point that out. But I also want to alert you that at least in Eugene, there's an ad on TV of a guy who's, apologizing to his family that he took all these trees down and he really shouldn't have done it. And it shows the slaughtered landscape near his house because he was trying to get good signal for his family, but they could have just called up Comcast, which is now called Xfinity. So I thought I'd bring some of these things up to you. And if you have any comments, I'd sure like to appreciate it.
Yeah, well, Kathy, thank you so much for joining us from Oregon. And yeah, you're right. Comcast can bring cable right to the premises where you just hook up with wires and doors. So you shouldn't be decimating Mother Nature out there to clear the way for wireless signals. And yeah, if folks want to go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology and look at my resources page, I've got a link there to the military studies for anybody who wants to look at that science, because our military has developed this technology for warfare. That's what this radiation was designed for. And as you say, these beam-formed millimeter waves are used for crowd control, and they burn the skin, and that's why people start dispersing. So it's definitely not something we want in our society, let alone right at the curb outside of our homes. So I'm glad that people are active there. There's a group in New York led by Odette Wilkins, who's been educating all of their community boards, which represent 8 million people in New York City. And there was a hearing just recently. With the City of New York's Office of Technology. And a number of these boards came out and testified. I was able to testify along with them. And I was so grateful to hear the chair of this committee, Jennifer Gutierrez, open by saying, we're here to listen and learn whether this Link New York City or Link 5G project is actually serving the industry or serving the public. And she did her homework and she asked really pointed questions. So we take encouragement that there, like Dr. Carlo said earlier, there's a lot of really great initiatives happening around the country, but we can't wait for a cavalry to come in, because there is none. And there's so much we can do if we just pluck up the courage to get out there, get everybody around you educated first. If you're one voice going to the authorities, in my experience, you're very easily swept under the rug. So use the resources, have a screening in your living room of Generation Zapped, get your friends and neighbors and the grandparents and everybody together, because our senior citizens not only have perhaps more discretionary time than active parents, but they've also been around the block quite a few times, and they recognize this big tobacco playbook when they see it. So keep educating, expect it to be uphill the whole way, and nobody's going to take the ball and run with it. But when we put our thoughts together, then there's a lot of activity that we can, kind of parlay off of one another. And Odette is...
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
I'm on the phone. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You are the best speaker that I've heard on the subject, just how succinctly and all the topics that you cover. And I'm really blown away by your presentation. I just wanted to ask a question and make a statement. I wanted to, I'm an electrosensitive person. My name is Sabrina, and I wanted to say just, when people talk about like how we could use like those headphones, with our cell phones, the hollowed, whatever they are, the other kind of headphones that you mentioned.
Yeah, hollow tube or air tube.
Right. And I wanted to tell you that these cell phones are so powerful. They're so incredibly strong that I could feel my son's cell phone when he turns it on in the yard. And so, basically, you don't even want it in your yard. You don't even want to turn on your cell phone as much as possible, and that you could use your cell phone Etherneted. I don't know if you mentioned that. There's the Ethernet adapter that you could use, with your cell phone on airplane mode. And with
when we send out our slides, we will go ahead and you'll be able to have a little diagram so people can see clearly how they can actually hardwire. And we include the Ethernet cables to the routers and then the adapters for that.
For the cell phone. Because
suggestion.
It's so strong. It's like a force field. I can feel it. It's like even from the yard, it's like a ray gun. It's so outrageously strong. But and then I wanted to ask you, and Bluetooth. When my neighbor has his Bluetooth on his phone or computer, I mean, Bluetooth is like it tortures me, even from my neighbor. You know, even worse than my neighbor's smart meters. The Bluetooth is like insane. The power of it. I wanted to ask you, what is the difference? You know, how people are talking about their, you know, us alternative, you know, folks who are concerned about EMFs are kind of asking or promoting the fiber optics to the home. And I was wondering, you know, I've heard, I've not experienced it, you know, physically been in this situation, so I can't have an opinion, you know, how it is on my body. But I am curious, as I've heard that the fiber to the home causes some electromagnetic problems, and I haven't experienced this with the cable. You know, getting our internet through the cable companies. So wondering, are we promoting the right thing? I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, I think so.
know.
Dr. Timothy Sheckley, who wrote Reinventing Wires, is working on a solution that's called EMMA, and I can't remember what that acronym stands for. But I think what he's discovering is there's a little filter that can be put on to ameliorate some of that excessive energy that could cause biological effects. So I think there are solutions in the works. But again, that's not my area. So you'd be better off contacting the Institute for Building Biology and asking that question. On their website, they have a number of free fact sheets, and you could poke around there to see if they've already answered it, or just find somebody in your area and reach out to them and pose your question.
Okay. And I'm just also curious, like, why do we need more stuff? Like, why do we need something beyond the
cable?
The cable, yeah.
You don't.
Like, what is the problem with it?
You know, they're always promoting a new revenue stream and new technologies, and so that's all we hear because they own mainstream media.
Right.
But hold on as long as you can to the stuff that you've got working. So
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Cece, can you
yes.
repeat for us the author of The Wishing Tree and perhaps spell their name?
Yes. Chris, C-H-R-I-S, McPhie, M-C, capital P-H-I-E, and Scott Ricker, R-I-C-K-E-R.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, I'm hearing the thunder come my way, and it's raining. It just came
Left
down
my
from
place,
Hampshire.
right your way.
Did it take down any of your trees? Yeah.
Oh, Cece, there's something very important I have to share with you, Kathy and Eugene. I live across the street from the Camas Ridge Elementary School, which they tore down the old one. They're building a new one now. But a 10-year-old girl experienced extreme adverse health effects after the 4J school upped the frequency to accommodate the iPads and, you know, the smart meters, etc. And she had to go to 7 doctors and psychiatrists to find out from Dr. Paul Dart, who actually lives on my street, I found out a few blocks away, that it was an electromagnetic disease. And her mother, I won't say exactly all the details, but her mother is a prominent head of a department in education in this community. And so her daughter now is about 16, but she went about 2 or 3 years ago to the legislature. She actually drove to Salem, over an hour away, and spoke in support of this, that we're going to be putting out this educational information about, you know, wireless problems. But the other thing is, I want to say, when I heard Dr. Barry Trower, B-A-R-R-I-E, T-R-O-W-E-R, British microwave specialist trained in the 50s, He spoke with Dr. Martin Paul at the Unitarian Church in Portland, the four of us that attended, and that is taped probably still on YouTube by Deborah Tavares, Tavares from stopthecrime.net. He actually said that wireless is a weaponized form of radio frequency. And he came out about mid-90s to start getting involved in this when he realized that they were going to be putting Wi-Fi in homes and schools. And finally, I want to say that I am a realtor, been a real estate agent for 35 years. I'm very well known for being an activist and environmentalist in general. But I would say I wrote to the National Association of Realtors and asked them for a bibliography about 7 or 8 years ago. And they sent me a 4-page bibliography about articles about that had appeared about whether having a cell tower was near your home was good or bad. Well, one article said that about 90% of renters and 90% of home buyers do not want to buy a house within, close proximity of a cell phone tower.
Yes, that's so true. And I think if folks go to Americans for Responsible Technology and look at their materials there, you'll find that article as well. And if folks want to go to my webpage at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, on my resources page, when we look at the military experts, you will find Barry Trower's work there as well. So thank you so much for sharing those resources. Okay, well, my lights are starting to flicker here too. So we better wrap this up before we get cut off by Mother Nature out there. Any other questions before we go? Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And Deb, as always, thank you for being my partner in crime here. And we have the next webinars coming up in July. They're always listed out at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our events page. And I know that Deb is gracious to post them at the Facebook pages for New Hampshire and Massachusetts for Safe Technology. All right, everybody, take care, share with your loved ones, and let us know how we can help.
Thank you,
Okay.
Cece. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you,
was
everyone.
this recorded?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
We'll send it out to
Oh.
everybody who
Oh,
registered.
great. Thank you. It's really great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mhm.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy July 4th.
Oh, thank you. Let's, pray for our independence from radiation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.